So a very key thing about NAMRO SA is that we are not DHA. We are not core funded. We are driven to fill gaps based on those requirements out there, the research that needs to be done, the things that the warfighter are missing. In part, that means that not having that core funding, being soft money, we have hungry researchers. We have very motivated scientists at this command who work very hard, who write a lot of grants. We write grants to DHA through multiple facets, CDMRP, those kinds of things. We also have ONR, we have multiple opportunities. And we also have the ability to connect with different government entities to assist them in testing, developing, and ultimately launching a variety of products and opportunities. So we do gap-driven combat casualty care, craniofacial, and directed energy research. Our mission is specific to survival, operational readiness, and safety of all DoD personnel. And this is routine and expeditionary operations. And so that also means that our mission is more shaped by filling those gaps than it is necessarily any specific requirements from any one agency. So we have specific areas of research that are performed by our command. However, any identified gaps definitely create an opportunity for us to sort of pursue that as a research opportunity. And so our command is split between two facilities. Our headquarters office, or our command suite, and craniofacial health are housed with the Army Institute of Surgical Research. We have a very close working relationship with ISR. We have for many years. They're a wonderful collaborator, so we enjoy working with them very much. The other part of our command, which includes directed energy and combat casualty care, as well as our vivarium spaces, are at the Tri-Service Research Laboratory, which we share with the U.S. Air Force 711th Human Performance Wing. And so, like I was saying, the scope of research is basic, applied, advanced technology research and development. So we like to think of ourselves from bench to bedside. We have scientists who are doing very preliminary, basic science research at the bench. And then we have clinicians, a multitude of clinicians from different backgrounds, doing that much more advanced level of research, the development side, the testing, the improvement, verification, validation, all of these things we are happy to support. And so, as I was kind of alluding to, Chief of Naval Operations, so CNO, that's our boss. And so our chain of command connects down through BUMED, Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, down through NMFP, and then we have an immediate superior in command, or an ISIC command, that's at Silver Spring, Maryland. They also have a laboratory. So in total, there are 8 Navy research enterprise laboratories all over the world. And each of our labs have a very sort of unique mission, function, task. And so what I'll do today, in part, is go over those specific areas that we at NAMRO SA do. So we break out into 4 science directorates with 2 administrative. And so the 4 scientific directorates are what I will focus on. And in that discussion, we'll begin with combat casualty care. So combat casualty care and operational medicine have 3 primary areas of research. The first of which I'll discuss is biomedical systems engineering and evaluation. And so we affectionately call this group the engineers. We have a PhD biomedical engineer, and he's got a staff of 3 plus 1 to 2 interns who come back depending on the time of the year. So they do a lot of technical work in terms of using AI, different imaging systems to improve clinical work, including in dentistry, machine learning algorithms, pain identification versus stress during procedures. They also do testing and improvement of multiple devices, including tourniquets and tracheal tubes. One of their major projects is they're working with Steri-3 to optimize, improve an ozone field sterilizer. And so this is one of our favorite projects in the command. This is a Pelican case-sized field sterilizer that uses hydrogen peroxide, produces ozone, and is able to sterilize on-site instruments. So it could be dental instruments, medical surgical instruments. And so they're working very, very hard to get this product launched. Another thing that we're heavily involved in, along with ISR, is polar medicine research. As both commands are very integrated into the combat casualty care research spectrum, we're starting to look at the change in theater. We're not in the desert anymore. We're looking at other opportunities, other areas, or I should say, we're looking at opportunities to improve combat casualty care in other areas where war may be waged, leaning more into the Pacific regions, leaning more into the North, colder regions. So we have to be ready to conduct combat casualty care in these areas, and minus 20 degrees looks a lot different than 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 degrees when you're trying to place an IV, treat wounds, even change your gloves out. So we're trying to be ready, we're working to be ready for that fight. Cellular and immune-based adjuncts for casualty care. This group specializes in basically every flavor of in vitro testing you can think of. They have a very unique, I think it's very cool, in vitro model of endotheliopathy. They use this to test potential blood replacement products, whole blood analogs, before they go into in vivo testing. They have 2D, 3D cell-based platforms. They do rapid screening. They look at novel therapeutics. They do a lot of organoid testing, these kind of things. So they are quite important to sort of that streamline, that flow chart in terms of when you're getting ready to test product, have some kind of a blood product ready for human use. You would start in vitro, you would move in vivo, and then of course to your trials. And so along with them, we have expeditionary and trauma medicine. So this group boasts the DoD's only polytrauma hemorrhage model. And so this makes us extremely unique and valuable for partnering with groups or investigators that have potential blood product replacement technology or other whole blood analogs that they're interested to test. And in that light, we're actually working very closely with DARPA right now to test, to validate, and hopefully advise and improve on a potential whole blood analog that could be ready in a matter of years for the field. We also do investigation of other multifunction resuscitation fluids. And then we examine the Reboa and the XStat, which are two very unique and interesting hemorrhage control devices for basically optimizing their use in theater and beyond. And so our directed energy health effects, this is more of a new directorate. We just kind of launched it from department size to directorate size very recently. Directed energy health effects is specifically examining the health effects of directed energy injuries. And so I mentioned before that we share TSRL with the 711th. They are a line command who look at bioeffects. So they're looking at the sort of de-weaponization perhaps of DE energies, where we're looking at if one of our people is affected by some kind of a directed energy insult, how do we understand it, characterize it, triage it, guidance for these things, and ultimately treat them effectively and recognize them in the future. And so we look at laser health effects. So this is well beyond sort of the traditional eye injuries that are always of concern. We look at soft tissue, bone, all of these different injuries of numerous lasers of different powers, sizes, that kind of thing. So that would include the triage efforts, development and testing of laser countermeasures. So looking at all the ways that we can prepare our personnel to prevent or mitigate laser injury. Similarly with EMF health effects, we're looking at the identification, characterization, and ultimately the treatment and prevention of EMF health effects. And this includes acoustic energy injuries, AHI, some of those other items that I can't go into too much detail with, but this is something that we're very heavily focused on. And then finally, medical modeling and simulation. We are working industriously hard to make sure that we have a reproducible, tractable models for characterizing and understanding DE injuries. And that's important because that allows us to further investigate these insults and injuries at the molecular, genetic, cellular level so that we can fully characterize, understand, and again, identify treatments, prevention strategies, and so forth. Finally, our craniofacial health and restorative medicine. We have a biomaterials group, and so this group is very interested in developing unique bandages. So these are bandages of different types. We have electrospun, we have hydrogel dressings. They're loaded with different types of small molecules, antibiotics, those kind of things. They look at time release stabilization. So this is taking your field bandage and expanding its use to increase healing of wounds of different types, burns, other trauma. So improving outcomes just by loading these with unique therapeutics and sort of designing it from there. And so the other things we work on are dental restorative materials, or sort of a self-healing composite dental restorative material to salvage dental trauma from failed fillings, that kind of thing. And then we look at we investigate the effects of extreme environments. So obviously I was talking about we were in the desert for a while, so we're always concerned about how 120 degree heat might affect some of our therapeutics or drugs. But then the question also becomes, when you're in -20, what do you do with that bag of IV fluid? Is it going to freeze? Can you use it out? That kind of thing. We also look at epidemiology. This is kind of the lessons learned group. So kind of pulling a lot of data from previous campaigns where we're able to pull clinical information about medevacs, dental emergencies. What were the dental emergencies? How could we have prevented them? This is a big deal because medevacs are very expensive. And although dental emergencies don't account for all medevacs, we like to think that maybe those are some of the ones that could have been preventable. How do we prevent them? And then finally, environmental surveillance. So NAMRO is the Navy's designated agent for mercury abatement. This is important because although most dental practices out in town don't use amalgam anymore, the military still does, and with quite commonly. And so those silver fillings do have mercury in them. So we're always looking at ways to optimize how to prevent the mercury from getting into the water. There are already EPA standards where they require 95% mitigation of that into the water. We aim for 99%. So we're continuously optimizing and improving those mercury abatement systems, such as this mercury abatement trap. You can see this dental trap that sits on the back of the chair. You can see in the photo there. And then finally, maxillofacial injury and disease. They look at different ways to improve infections in wounds. This is using certain novel therapies. Obviously, we all know antibiotic resistance is a big deal in bacterial and fungal infections, and it's only going to get worse. How do we kind of step outside the box of what our traditional treatment modalities are and start looking at better ways, unique ways to mitigate these infections? And so there's laser use, there's different nanoparticle uses, things of that nature, and then of course phage technology. We have a group that does engineered phage technology. They're looking at it right now for snake bite envenomation, as well as potential bacterial infection, antibiotic resistant bacterial infection mitigation. And then finally, our veterinary sciences group. They are primarily there to support our protocols. They make sure that we're doing a good job, doing good science. They also support the Air Force. And then they also train, they provide training for the Army Nurse Anesthetist Training Program, as well as comment on casualty care protocol for working dogs. And so this is kind of our shakeout of our sponsors and stakeholders. I mentioned before that we are still Navy, but I will tell you that the DHA is our #1 sponsor, so we're very grateful for that. We definitely get a lot of offers and kind of phone calls from them, so we do basically whatever they need from us. We're always happy to support and collaborate. Obviously, we have other DoD entities that we work with, Navy, of course, other services, that kind of thing. And then our key stakeholders, of course, are all of the COCOMs that we are constantly receiving their advisement on what their needs are, what their requirements are, and supporting however we can. And so this is just a demonstration, a map that kind of shows all of our collaborators, including our sister labs, which are all over the world. We collaborate with numerous universities, academic centers, industry partners, and of course, all of our military partners as well. So at this point, I can take any questions, or we just want to, does anybody have any questions?
So, got an airway devices. I know you guys recently bed down your in-route care system. When you get to those end users, you could go through you, if you're looked at to demonstrate that product. How would you do that?
So that tends to depend upon where the device is in terms of FDA approval, that kind of thing. Typically, we are happy to partner with you if there's something where you're looking to see how can we expand its use, is it field ready, what will we need to do, but we're not necessarily a sort of a yes/no facility or like a yes/no kind of check in the box, but we're always happy like to kind of see what you have, see how people in our command can examine it, study it, test it out, how we can work together on that. And then certainly when we get to a point where we say, I think this is ready to go, we're always happy to sort of put that information out there. But yeah.
Basically, I know you're good. You're not a yes, no. Just really just get in front of SMEs to look at it and say this is the vector to go down. It makes sense.
Absolutely,
So,
yes.
okay.
And then sometimes even if it's not as specifically, we talk to our friends at ISR, JTS, other COCOMs, other commands out there where we can reach out to our surgeons, our combat deployment teams, all of these colleagues within the forces, and kind of say, what do you think of this? How do you use it? Great example of that is one of our tourniquet systems I was referring to that the engineers were working on. So we are co-located with NMFC and METC, a lot of acronyms, but basically those are the schools where the corpsmen get trained. And so we will often bring the corpsmen over and we'll say, I'm going to walk you through how to use this device. So they use it like on a testing mannequin, and then they say, this is fantastic, or this is terrible, or, kind of to that matter. We went up to Alaska recently for ISEX and some of those rollouts, and it was the same thing where the corpsmen were out there, they were working in the field. It's like, I don't know, it's like 10 degrees outside, and they're seeing how many of the things they can kind of do effectively in that climate. They're having their hands measured, like the temperature, that kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely. If it's not just us, absolutely. Yeah, we're happy to pull in whoever we need to. We just make some phone calls and get our friends to come by, or we take it out in the field and see how it goes. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Madry. And more to your point, the one-on-one sessions that you can sign up for at AIM are a panel. So each session will have a panel from the tri-services and the VA.
I'm Colonel Joseph Madry. I'm the Chief of the Department of Clinical Investigation. First, I'd like to thank my Deputy Colonel Pearson because these are her slides I just stole from my name on. So as always, this is my view and my view only, not getting my boss's views. So we are part of the clinical investigation, which clinical investigation, the rough definition is we're looking at knowledge or products and how can we use those to improve the quality or care that we provide, particularly within the resource limited environment the military operates in. I am unique. So my background, I'm an emergency physician and a medical toxicologist. I've served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa. I was assigned for 5 years to the 59th Medical Wing XT as the director of the Naval Medical Research Center. I was the deputy commander of the ISR for 3 years, and now I'm at BAMC as the DCI. So except for NAMRU, I think I've worked at every major medical lab here in San Antonio at one point or another. So I'm pretty familiar with them. Most of my job, honestly, is going to be a point of contact for you if you're interested in doing stuff with BAMC, unless it's directly emergency medicine related. So we have the DoD's largest graduate health platform. So we have 699 graduate students right now at BAMC at any given time, which is far larger than any other facility. We also collaborate with USU, which is where I went to med school, the military med school in Bethesda, Maryland, which is where a large percentage of graduates will come here to San Antonio to train within our programs. So the SIP's job is to do management support, policy support, process support, resource support, and contracting support. So if you need any of those things, which you will need at least one of those things if you want to do research at BAMC, we are the office that will help you with that process, navigate you through that process. I could give you a 24-hour lecture on how to deal with that process, but it's just easier if you reach out to us and we help you with your specific study. So these are all the different SIPs within the Department of Defense or Defense Health Agency now. You can see there's a lot of them. The key thing I want you to know is that BAMC is by far the largest. There's not even a comparison as far as MTF size at our facility versus the other facilities. We are the only level 1 trauma center in the Department of Defense. We see 6,000 trauma casualties per year, 80,000 patients per year in our emergency department, which is consistent with most large hospitals in big cities. Definitely way larger than any other facility. We have way more inpatient capability. We also have way more subspecialty care. So if you want a pediatric neurointensivist, there's probably like 5 of those in the Department of Defense, and most of them, if not all of them, are going to be at BAMC. So when you start getting into the weed studies, we're going to have to be the site that you reach out to. So our funding, and I just put this in there to let you know that if you're coming to me for money, I have none. That is how this works. I work for the hospital. I am funded by the hospital. Which is not RT and D&E money like NAMR would have, or actually, I guess you guys have to go.
We're not going.
You have your own money too. So there are certain labs here that will get RT D&E money that they can use, but I'll just let you know right now, if you go asking for money, the answer is going to be no, because we've all taken massive budget cuts over the last 20 years. None of us have money. We're interested in collaborating if you have money and you want to bring in your money to do research. For BAMC, that's going to be about a 27% overhead charge. Yeah.
Do you partner with companies like this or this type of?
Yes, we do. So if you're trying to do an SBIR, you would reach out to me. If you don't already have a point of contact, you would tell me what the study is, and then I would go find that department and see if there's someone in that department interested in supporting your study. So depending on what product is, I may or may not be successful in finding someone interested. But we do need grant funding to do it. That's kind of the point. We don't have money. So, but yes, if you want, like I said, 27% overhead is generally what we'll charge. There may be some modifications depending on what you're doing. So our facility here at BAMC, I'm the chief, which is a physician position. We have 13 personnel roughly, give or take, assigned to us. But our mission focuses primarily on support of that graduate medical education. So we do basic translational and clinical research, mostly clinical as opposed to basic research, which is more like the ISR and AMR and the other labs do more of the basic stuff. We definitely get involved in some of that, but it's going to be those other labs that's kind of their premier expertise. What I can offer you that no other facility can offer you is the physicians and the medical personnel if you're trying to do clinical research. We're pretty much the only MTF large enough to do any kind of significant clinical trial out of. Any other time you're going to have to turn to the civilian sector. The expertise we can provide is that you can do your study in the civilian sector. We definitely have supported multiple multi-center trials, with BAMC being one of those centers within those trials. But we're the only place you can get a lot of military clinicians. If the clinical question you're asking is, hey, does this apply to the military clinician? You're basically going to need to come to us, because we're going to be the place that has the physicians, nurses, and et cetera. Yes, ma'am.
I got a question online. What is translational medicine?
Translational medicine is taking something from, I have a cool little box, and actually making it work in the field and be operational. So as an example, like my experience is 95% of the time when some agency comes to me and says, hey, I have this device, how is you as a clinician are going to use it? The answer is I'm not. It does not solve a problem I currently have. It just creates more problems that I don't need. And that's just the unfortunate fact with most medical devices. So translational research is, how do I take that device and incorporate it? A good example right now would be, because we're looking at this large combat operation in Asia, we can guess what country that might be with. How do we take a medic who graduated high school, went through basic training, medical training, and how do I get them to do what I as an emergency physician can do after 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, and 2 years of fellowship? You develop that device, and if that device is something I can use as an ER doctor, but the medic can't use it, 99% of the time it's not going to be helpful to us, because most casualties will not get to me in time for that intervention to be used. So the translational piece is now looking at that aspect of making it useful. So if you do studies that have any of the above, it has to go through my office, or we collaborate with these agencies to do it. So animal research, we help oversee that. That will not be at our facility, but it'll either be at the ISR or over at ST, but we will help you with the paperwork necessary to get that done, collaborate with that. JAG, the legal office, that's pretty much everything you're gonna do with this is gonna require legal review. Biomed lab, we have a very small one of our own, but we also have access to larger ones, and we can of course contract with outside labs too if we need to send stuff. Cadaver, any cadaver research, if you're testing your product in a cadaver and involves any kind of military personnel, it needs to come through my office to get approved. That's just a regulation, so FYI, in case you're wanting to test a device in cadavers. Any proposals that will go to the IRB, they're gonna be actual prospective studies, will need to come to my office and scientific review. I don't control the IRB, I collaborate with the IRB, but they don't follow under my chain of command. But I will help you collaborate with them if you're trying to navigate that issue, which is, all IRBs are a challenge. Within the Department of Defense, IRBs are extra challenging. Funding, the funding will have to come through my office, not necessarily be sent through us, but we will have to sign off on the paperwork that deals with that. So if you're bringing money, talk to me. If you need a CRADA, MOU, MOA, all these, if you don't know what these are, those are all acronyms that basically say you and the Department of Defense or Defense Health Agency are agreeing to work together. We cannot do that without that paperwork done, so it has to come through my office for processing. And then any big data you need access to, I can help you develop paperwork. If you want to get data from JTS, from ISR, from 59th Medical Wing, from the Defense Health Agency, as far as our electronic health record, we can assist with that too. So we've collaborated with all of these agencies, including Velocity before in the past. We intend to continue to do so. So if you need help with those partnerships, UT Health, we have quite a few studies going through them. And as I mentioned, I've worked for almost all those labs on there and have at least collaborated with them in some way, shape, or form. Our own personal policies that we control for BAMC is SIP policy, which doesn't apply. But again, I want to emphasize, if you're doing any kind of cadaver research and there's a military personnel involved, it has to come through our office. I will help you. I will not make it difficult. I just don't want to get into trouble because someone was breaking the rules and didn't know it, as far as the active duty person. Scientific review, like I said, will be the ones that sign off on making sure that this is a valid study, that the question you're answering is relevant, and the BAMC can actually provide the data you need to be able to answer that question. And then reimbursement. So any kind of funding issue, our office will sign off on that. Sure. So my predecessor focused our lab predominantly on HPV research. I took over the job in December. I was tasked with my boss, Colonel Stackle, with focusing on two things. So graduate health education, like I said, we have 699 students. If you're not familiar, the students may or may not, depending on what program they're going to be required to do some kind of research in order to graduate. Their faculty will be required to do research in order to maintain that program's credential. So the other aspect is trauma center. As I mentioned, BAMC is the only level 1 trauma center in the Defense Health Agency. The difference between a level 1 and a level 2 is almost exclusively, except for a few subspecialties, almost exclusively research. That's the difference. So if we don't do our research, we lose our level 1 trauma status. You can imagine that is never going to happen. So research is a big important focus of ours, particularly within the trauma room. Having said that, as you notice, like when NAMR presented and probably when some of the other labs presented at other times, like ISR, for example, it's very combat casualty focused. And there are the other labs that are not combat, like infectious disease, like the USAMRID, the radiation lab, but they're still combat deployment related. We're the only facility that's going to have a significant interest, with some caveats, in just routine patient care. Because we have to take care of our active duty during combat, but we also need to take care of our beneficiaries, which is going to be all the spouses, children, and retirees. And so very similar to the civilian sector as far as, when I'm working a shift at BAMC in the emergency department, most of my really sick crashing patients, minus the trauma casualties from San Antonio, are going to be the older elderly patient and all those comorbidities that go along with it. So the other labs they're not going to be interested in studying how do you treat sepsis in an 85-year-old, because that's not a military mission. So if you want something along that line, reach out to me. We would be the facility that can support that. Okay, so that's all I have. Any questions for me?
Sir, can UT Health, I have a little bit more money than you guys do. Can you take money from them to facilitate a study at BAMC or vice versa?
Yes, it's a long, complicated process, but yes, we can. So Patrick Ng is he's a former emergency physician in the Air Force. He's a physician toxicologist at university. Him and I have a project that we're doing together, looking at Boa. Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration. There are a lot of physicians at university that used to work at BAMC. There's a lot of physicians at BAMC that might at university. So there's a lot of cross communication there.
If they needed some of your personnel to be incorporated to study it, you guys can't get involved and collaborate.
Yes, and we may not even need funding too, but you still need to come through my office because we'll have to do the paperwork, but we can get outside investigators access to BAMC, so they can be coming in and enrolling patients at BAMC, even though BAMC may or may not be getting funding depending on what arrangement we want to do.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alicia Swan. Talk about the Veterans Affairs Research. Thank you. So I'm the Director of Rehabilitation Research. I support our research of office and development here in San Antonio, Texas in an unofficial capacity. I have the standard disclaimers. I work for the VA, but I don't really represent their views. Follow me on social media to learn more. So I don't have any conflicts of interest to report. Okay. So the thrust of research at the VA is ultimately to serve veterans. That's the short answer. This is the actual answer the VA has published. Just like it's like motto, it's coming. So we want to increase veterans' access to high quality clinical trials. We want to really make sure that the research we're doing at the VA actually impacts the lives of the veterans we serve. We want to really put to work data that we get at the VA for veterans into clinical care, directly into clinical care practice. And we want to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion within our sphere of influence at the VA, which is our veterans. We're, as a large organization, so this is VA level stuff, we have about 105 active VA sites, because not every VA has a research office. This is like auto advancing on me and I don't know why. It's okay. I'll do it under pressure. It's actually more fun. Okay, so lots of publications, actively funded research. My goal today is actually to kind of set you up with what this looks like here in San Antonio and how you can partner integrally here in San Antonio. But this gives you an idea of the footprint across the country. Also, just like we had for the military side, we are under the Undersecretary for Health, and I'm going to touch on this in a second. See, I didn't press anything. I don't know why it's doing that. But we have these kind of separate divisions. We're moving away from this model, but we have 4 functional methodology areas for research we actually work with, and our internal funding, which I'm going to touch on, has historically been in those bins, but we're moving away from that, comically slowly, which is the VA way. Okay, so these sections, we're going from like the VA intramural funding piece, we're going from these 4 areas: rehab, biomedical, clinical, and health service, and we're moving to what's called an actively managed portfolio, which is going to be more thematically focused. So more like the DoD CDMRP side, where we're really looking at specific areas and not focusing on all of the areas through several different methodologies, which was what was happening and is still happening up top. We're in that transition process now. I believe the ones I like down here, those are our actual AMP areas right now, although the military exposures one is relatively new, and the others are representative of things we've been doing for a long time, except for the psychedelics one. That one's actually really fun. I'm excited about that. We actually are very happy to be home here in San Antonio to the largest cannabis-focused clinical trial in the VA system, first ever, actually. So that's something that we're working with here locally through Don McGeary, who's with UT Health, so we partner with UT Health, spoiler. So I tried to focus the rest of this to be tight. It's like everything is going to be a one-off with the VA. So I wanted to structure this as questions, because this is usually where the details come out and people are like, oh, that's weird. But basically, can I be an investigator with the VA? Yes, you can. But we're structured to actually do most of that through employees.
That's typically because we really care about having our clinicians be engaged in research that serves our veterans, because they know, like, they're boots on the ground, they're actually ones that see the problems, can understand how solutions can fit into that existing space. So you can, and VA employees have fewer barriers, mostly because they just need research privileges. Anybody that's not a VA employee effectively needs to volunteer for the VA, which feels very comically like being hired by the VA, because it is effectively being hired by the VA. So background check, all this other stuff actually has to come into play if you want to partner with the VA and see anything that even vaguely resembles individually lined data. So that's one barrier that I love to share with people because it's special here. You also, if you want to work with the VA as a principal investigator with funded VA work, which I briefly touched on, you actually have to be employed by the VA or have the chief of research be willing to sign something that says, if you do get funding, you will become a VA employee, which is again, a kind of quirky thing that's specific to the principal investigator level. We can partner with other investigators as co-investigators through another contracting mechanism that I will not bleed your brain with in this moment. But if you want to learn more, happy to do so. Okay. But that is one of the caveats to being a principal investigator with the VA, which comes up all the time. Lots of people come to us and ask, I want to recruit veterans, how do I do it? Well, the VA does support some of that, but it comes with a lot of caveats. And it has a lot to do with the way the VA works and respects our veterans and veteran data. So first of all, like anything that allows outside people to have access to veterans has to be vetted really strongly. So we work alongside VA's privacy office, data security offices, human subjects offices, and make sure that all that access is actually covered under all the regulatory approvals. We also sometimes and frequently need to do data sharing agreements to make sure that that's all covered and all the parties know what's going on. I hope it's still auto. Okay. So with the veteran recruitment piece, I'm sorry, this is auto advancing on me, which is super fun. We don't do many recruitment only protocols at our local VA. Yeah. I don't know what it's doing, I'm so sorry.
No, that's
I broke it.
I don't know.
That's how we know it's the hour's almost over, because Swan broke it. That's how that put me at the end for that reason.
We're still here, right? Recruiting veterans?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I'm trying to hit the things that come up all the time. Recruitment only protocols are rare. We're really interested in trying to make partnerships between our VA clinicians and researchers and other researchers. So that's something we're more interested in having conversations about, so we can grow those relationships rather than just sending our participants or sending patients out to studies through flyers. So the middle part of this is that we can do the flyer posting situation, but it requires a lot more administration. Like we have to make sure that the flyer includes a statement that says the VA doesn't pay and does not fund and does not sponsor the research. And this is almost entirely for legal purposes. Because if they get a flyer from the VA and they participate in a study with the VA and they are injured in that, in some way, shape, or form in that study, that becomes a VA liability. And they are very against that. But we also just don't have the money. So there's that. So when people approach our office, we're usually like, how can we partner and make that partnership work? Okay, so with Science Friends, I kind of touched on the VA data stuff. We're very, very particular about how data comes in and out of our system. So we do that through a lot of agreements with privacy, data security, oftentimes our legal office to make sure that sharing is fine and that intellectual property is protected. And sometimes data sharing requires a legal agreement, but we have lots of templates, so it's not as painful as it sounds, although usually it is about as painful as it sounds. Yeah, that's one. So with companies, this is another quirky thing about the VA. If you have a company and you want to partner with the VA can't directly participate with you. We have partners that help us with that. Locally, that's effectively a nonprofit corporation that's attached to the VA. Ours is called FAVOR, the Foundation for Advancing Veterans Health Research. Health through research, hidden T. on that acronym. We love those. So they actually help us bring in non-VA research money to the VA to do research. They do it a lot like the military would through CRADAs and agreements and all those things, but they help us bring DoD money, NIH money, non-VA money. The VA is very good at handling its own money. I'll say that on a stand too. But when it comes to research, they can't touch non-VA money. So we do that through Favor, and I'll introduce you. Our local nonprofit is amazing. You'll still probably want to find a clinical partner or somebody at the VA, and we can help you with that. I can help you with that. I can tap you into the office and find those people because we want to grow our VA research. But that's something you definitely want to do at the outset. And then, as always, this is such like a learning process for people that work in the academic space where like things happen quickly, but you want to start early and often because we have to get a lot of approvals from different offices to actually participate in research in a way that works for everybody. So sorry. So research at our VA is like every VA in that it's like no other VA. We actually use UTESCA as our IRB of record. So any research that we do locally tends to be through UTESCA, UT Health. I put an asterisk there because we work with a lot of industry trials. So we actually work with other external IRBs as well, but I wasn't going to burden your brain with all those details. Other IRBs are also in play. UTESCA is our IRB of record. Once you actually get approval or get a determination through our IRB, you then come to South Texas. The IACUC is for animal-related research, which I no longer do unless you count humans as really large animals. But they are actually, that IACUC is actually at South Texas. R&D service then oversees all the research that passes through these two regulatory bodies in an administrative capacity. So that comes into play usually after approval of those other ones. And I mentioned before, we have institutional partners that help us get research done. We have our MPC, because we need more acronyms, through Favor, which again helps with those research partnerships that are not VA. And then we also have what we call an affiliate university in UTESCA, and that means that we have like a lot of standing agreements. This is very generally said, standing agreements with them supporting our research mission broadly. Okay, so this is contact information if you're like, hey, how do I get in at the VA? You can tell I was feeling spicy on Friday with the image, you're welcome. My boss is Dr. Amita Kamet. She's our chief of research over at the VA. So you're welcome to reach out to her or myself. I just help out with the human research office. My primary job is director of rehab research, and that includes polytrauma. But you can always reach out to me and I can help connect you because we all want to grow this space here at South Texas. I have business cards too if you want one. And then Michelle Trimble is the CEO for our nonprofit corporation. So if you want to try and forge a research relationship, any one of us or all of us will work. We all work together kind of relentlessly. So those are points of contact if you're looking to find a clinical partner to see what the thirst or hunger or interest is for a research program. These are a great place to start. Okay, I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Questions?
So for HR, is that for just Vision 17 or is that for every vision?
Yeah, they're specific to the hospital area. So that wouldn't even be for Vision 17 entirely. It would be for our specific South Texas Veterans Healthcare System.
So there's
Yeah.
gonna be one of those for probably each region.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Very good. Any other questions? Online, Caitlin?
Several questions about whether we're able to send out contact information details for speakers today.
The slide decks will be posted on our website after this, along with the recording. So you can go to the website and see slide decks and recordings, which has contact information. for the most part. Any other questions in the room online? Does not have to be just for Dr. Swan, but for anybody else. Yes.
So for it being a self-funded group, how are collaborations, how do they work best? Is that something where ordinary scientists are looking for partners and they're applying for grants and outside entities are assembled, or is it the other way around where outside groups And,
So essentially all of the above, yeah, we're a very collaborative organization, so we'll see, there will be, sort of opportunities where we know there's a certain grant that's coming up that we can apply for, and a company will approach us and they say, hey, we're really interested in this grant and we think you'd be a great partner, that kind of thing, especially those grants, programs where they sort of seem to sort of favor or encourage that kind of collaboration. Like a handful of CDMRP programs are really into that. So that's one of the opportunities. And then some people will just come to us and say, here's $1 million. Can you help us make this work? So those are opportunities. So sometimes people bring the funding themselves, but a lot of the times we do get those calls where someone will even have a funding opportunity in mind and they'll come and they'll say, we would love to partner with you because we think your lab has the ability to do this. Oftentimes it's in these kind of situations too, where, you know, I get up there, somebody gets up there and we talk about the things we do, and then somebody says, oh man, that lab, that person would be a great partner for this project, this device, that help us take this off the ground. So we don't really do things like FDA approval, but we can definitely get you there in terms of some of the early testing. And sort of those aspects like the in vivo stuff and even like for certain dental materials, those kind of things, we can definitely help with some of those early requirements. But yeah, that's typically where that comes from.
there are internal, intramural funding opportunities that access to this funding, or is that?
Yes, and that's typically, so we will, for those intramural funding opportunities, we're typically the ones who will sort of frontline those, obviously, because we have to, they're intramural. But what we can do is we usually will set up some kind of a CRADA or other agreement or contract, you know, whatever it may be. We have a whole agreements office plus a lot of support over in the DC region to help us make sure we do it right. But yeah, definitely there are those opportunities to partner, and we love to partner. We love our collaborators, so.
Good, yes.
Does advanced CCI do much outpatient beneficial use?
So yeah, within the various domains, so pulmonology. Depending on specific.
Does that still go through your office or you?
Yes, so those are mine.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions?
A couple more questions on mine. The first one is, what are the names of the other nonprofit institutions in the paper?
Oh, I could share a link, there's a link online. Like, so Favor is just the one we have here in South Texas, but there's probably dozens across the country. So it would just be whatever specific to the local VA R&D office.
Do you work with the other nonprofit foundations like the Henry Jackson Foundation or Metis or Geneva?
Probably not as much as we should.
So we do. We work with Metis, Henry Jackson, all of those organizations. We have great contacts there. So that's another opportunity too, that you can kind of reach out to those groups because they usually know us better than we know ourselves, and they'll connect with us.
Same is true.
Right. Any final questions before we break for the day?
There is one final question online, just how can we get data about things like incidents?
It depends on why you want it, because sometimes that's something that's preparatory to research. You're trying to make an argument that there's a problem and you want to substantiate it with data. That's something you can do through a partner at the VA. Yeah, that's pretty much the first step, actually, in every instance. You need a partner at the VA that has access to that data. So that's what I would recommend, finding somebody at the VA or contacting any of us at the VA, and we can try and connect you with somebody that'd be interested in working with you. But access to that level of data at the VA requires that you have PI level privileges to do that. Preparatory to research is less administration than actual research, so it depends on what you want.
I don't know why our Kayla is doing this. Are you doing that, Kayla? This is crazy today. Man, all right. So does anybody have any final questions before we break for today? Okay, well, I want to thank you for your attendance in the room and online. Feel free to contact me if you have any further questions or need any additional information about this webinar or the AIM conference, we can get you set up with registration. And then just as a reminder, the recording and the slide decks will be posted online after this meeting. Should be up this afternoon. Okay, thank you for coming.